Today, I invite you to journey back, not decades, not centuries, but tens of thousands of years ago into a time when Earth was colder, darker, and far more brutal. A time when another species of human walked beside us, the Neanderthals. And no, this isn't just a dry history lesson. This is a story soaked in blood, mystery, and scientific nausea. Yes, you heard that right. Some of the ancient Neanderthal deaths were so horrifying that modern archaeologists, hardened by years of excavations, were left physically sick. So, what exactly did they find? Scene 1. A cave of cannibals in a remote cave in El Sidrón, Spain. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of 13 Neanderthals, men, women, and children. At first, it seemed like a family gathering, until they saw the bones split open, smashed, scraped clean. This wasn't a burial site. It was a Neanderthal butchery. What happened here? Evidence pointed to one thing: cannibalism. These ancient humans had butchered and eaten each other. Some researchers even discovered bones cracked open to suck out the marrow. Imagine digging up bones only to realize you're looking at the aftermath of prehistoric murder and consumption. One expert on the scene reportedly had to step away, overwhelmed by what was essentially a 49,000-year-old crime scene. Scene 2. The crushed skull of Shanidar. Let me take you to another cave. Shanidar in modern-day Iraq. Here, scientists found the skeleton of a Neanderthal with a crushed skull and broken bones. At first, they thought it was a simple cave-in death, but the truth might be far darker. One forensic reconstruction suggested blunt force trauma to the head, possibly inflicted with a weapon. Murder among Neanderthals, maybe, but what's more disturbing is this. His bones were carefully arranged. Flowers were scattered. There was a ritual, a murder followed by a funeral. A Neanderthal killed by his own, then mourned like a fallen brother. Scene 3. The child of Le Moustier in France. The skeleton of a Neanderthal child was discovered, but it wasn't the bones that disturbed experts. It was the way the jawbone was detached and the skull left separate from the body. Further analysis revealed cut marks, likely from sharp flint tools. This wasn't an animal attack. Were they removing the head on purpose? Some theorize it was a ritualistic decapitation, perhaps even a primitive belief system emerging. Others think it was another brutal case of survival cannibalism. Either way, it's enough to make even the strongest stomached anthropologists lose their lunch. Why this matters, you might ask. Why should we care? Because Neanderthals were not just brutes with clubs. They loved, they grieved, they cared for their wounded, but they also killed, cannibalized, and ritualized death. In their bones, we see both the beauty and horror of human nature, echoes of instincts we still carry today. The line between survival and savagery has always been thin, and Neanderthals remind us that evolution didn't come clean. It came through blood, pain, and unimaginable choices. In the damp, shadowy recesses of El Sidrón cave in northern Spain, archaeologists uncovered one of the most disturbing scenes in the study of prehistoric humanity. 13 Neanderthal individuals, men, women, and children, had met a gruesome end within this dark chamber. Initially, the discovery seemed to offer a window into Neanderthal family life, possibly even a burial site. But as researchers began examining the bones more closely, the reality turned out to be far more chilling. The skeletons were not simply resting in peace. Their bones bore unmistakable signs of deliberate defleshing, marrow extraction, and what can only be described as systematic butchery. Cuts were found on the ribs, collarbones, thigh bones, and even finger bones. Marks made by stone tools, sharp and intentional. Many of the long bones had been cracked open, likely to access the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Skulls were smashed and fragmented. This wasn't random destruction. This was controlled, deliberate dismemberment. The remains had not been scattered by predators or shifted by natural forces. They had been processed like meat. The evidence pointed to one disturbing conclusion: the Neanderthals of El Sidrón had been cannibalized. This act was not symbolic or ceremonial. It was utilitarian. Pattern of damage showed that the flesh had been removed with precision, the kind of anatomical knowledge that comes only with repeated practice. Scientists believe the individuals who committed these acts were other Neanderthals, perhaps even from a rival group. Whether it was the result of starvation, territorial conflict, or social breakdown remains unknown, but the implications are shocking. Neanderthals were not only capable of empathy and care, as other discoveries have shown, they were also capable of calculated violence and consumption of their own kind. The cave, sealed off from the outside world for tens of thousands of years, preserved this prehistoric tragedy in haunting detail. Advanced DNA analysis revealed the individuals shared close familial ties. Some were siblings, parents, or offspring. This suggests the group may have been a single extended family, killed and eaten together. The bones were dated to approximately 49,000 years ago, a time of environmental stress and competition for resources. If this was indeed a survival response, it shows the extreme conditions early humans endured and the horrifying choices they sometimes made. Archaeologists at the site were deeply disturbed by what they found. Even seasoned professionals, used to excavating mass graves and ancient remains, reported emotional and physical reactions to the discovery. One expert, after examining a skull with clear evidence of post-mortem processing, reportedly had to step away from the excavation site to recover from nausea. The raw brutality, preserved so clearly in ancient bone, offered a rare but terrifying look into the darker aspects of Neanderthal life. This discovery challenged earlier assumptions that Neanderthals were peaceful and socially simple, instead painting a more complex and unsettling portrait of our close evolutionary relatives. In the Shanidar cave of northern Iraq, archaeologists made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of Neanderthal behavior and raise haunting questions about their capacity for both violence and reverence. Among several Neanderthal skeletons uncovered there, one stood out, Shanidar III, an adult male whose remains showed clear evidence of a violent death. His skull had been crushed, and his ribs bore the marks of a deep, penetrating wound. Initially, it was thought the injuries could have been caused by a rockfall or natural accident, but further analysis suggested something far more intentional: blunt force trauma, and possibly a stab wound inflicted by a weapon. This injury wasn't random. It was precise, forceful, and likely fatal. One rib had been punctured in a way that matched the entry angle and depth of a thrusting spear. This indicated the attack may have come from another individual, possibly even a fellow Neanderthal. If so, this was not just a fatal accident, it was murder. Yet what makes the discovery even more astonishing is the context in which this individual was buried. Around his body were traces of pollen, evidence that flowers may have been intentionally placed alongside him. The arrangement of his remains suggested careful positioning, as if part of a burial ritual. This juxtaposition of brutal death and what appears to be ceremonial treatment revealed a complex emotional world. The people who buried Shanidar III might have mourned him, despite the possibility that his death came at the hands of their own group. If a killer existed among them, they still chose to honor the dead. The same hands that may have wielded the weapon could have placed flowers over the body. This blending of violence and compassion complicates the narrative of early humans and suggests that Neanderthals understood mortality in a deeply human way. In the archaeological site of Le Moustier in southwestern France, the remains of a Neanderthal child, unearthed by researchers, presented a deeply unsettling puzzle. What began as a routine excavation quickly turned into a scene that challenged assumptions about prehistoric death and ritual. The child's skeleton, estimated to be around 10 years old at the time of death, was found in a disarticulated state. Most disturbingly, the jawbone had been intentionally removed and placed separately from the rest of the skull, which itself was found away from the body. This deliberate positioning immediately raised suspicions among experts. Upon closer examination, scientists discovered cut marks on the jaw and cranial bones, precise, controlled incisions made by sharp stone tools. These were not the result of scavenging animals or geological movement. They were the product of human hands, and they indicated post-mortem manipulation. The incisions suggested efforts to deflesh or modify the skull, pointing to a level of anatomical understanding that hinted at either symbolic behavior or practical motives. One theory proposes that this was part of a ritualistic act, perhaps a form of early mortuary practice involving the separation and treatment of specific body parts. In many later human cultures, skulls were treated with reverence, sometimes displayed, decorated, or buried separately. Another theory, darker still, suggests cannibalism. The presence of cut marks and removal of flesh-rich areas like the jaw could mean the child was consumed, possibly during a time of extreme hunger. Whatever the cause, the Lemoustier child's remains offer haunting evidence of a moment in deep prehistory where survival, belief, and death intersected. It suggests that Neanderthals, like early Homo sapiens, had a complex relationship with their dead, capable of tenderness, but also capable of actions that reflect desperation, violence, or ritual. Neanderthals, once dismissed as primitive and brutish, have emerged through archaeological discoveries as deeply complex beings capable of both compassion and cruelty. Fossil records from various sites across Europe and the Middle East reveal that Neanderthals cared for their sick and injured, sometimes over extended periods of time. Skeletons have been found with signs of severe trauma, broken bones, deformities, even blindness. Yet the individuals survived long enough for these injuries to partially or fully heal. This suggests that others in the group provided food, shelter, and protection, an act of empathy and community not unlike that of modern humans. Yet this picture of tenderness is contrasted sharply by evidence of brutal behaviors. At sites such as El Sidran and Mula Gersi, human bones bear unmistakable signs of cannibalism, cut marks, marrow extraction, and signs of dismemberment. These were not isolated incidents, but repeated patterns across different regions, suggesting cannibalism was a practiced, and perhaps even accepted, behavior in times of scarcity or conflict. In some cases, the victims were children or family members, highlighting a grim reality where survival sometimes outweighed kinship. Additionally, injuries on Neanderthal remains hint at interpersonal violence. Fractures consistent with weapon strikes or close combat raise the possibility of social disputes, territorial battles, or even murder. The Shanidar cave finds, with evidence of both violent death and ritual burial, encapsulate this duality. They killed, but they also mourned. They inflicted wounds, but they also healed them. This paradox within the Neanderthal story shows they were not defined by a single trait, but rather existed within the full range of human experience. Their legacy is not simply one of extinction, but of deep emotional and behavioral complexity that mirrors our own capacity for both kindness and destruction. The remains of Neanderthals found across Europe and Western Asia offer more than just insight into their biology. They reveal something deeply unsettling about the earliest expressions of human nature. These ancient deaths, whether by violence, cannibalism, or possible ritual, expose a side of humanity that existed long before the rise of modern civilization. The behavior evidenced in these ancient remains challenges any romanticized notion of prehistoric life as simple or peaceful. Instead, it tells a story of survival, desperation, and emotional depth that blurs the line between instinct and intention. At sites like El Sidran, scientists found not just cannibalism, but signs that those consumed may have been close relatives of those who ate them, suggesting that even family bonds could be broken by the pressures of starvation or social collapse. In Shanidar, we see what may be the first recorded case of a deliberate burial, possibly with flowers. Yet the individual had suffered a violent death that could point to internal group conflict. In Lemoustier, a child's decapitated skull was handled in a way that suggests something beyond mere survival, hinting at symbolic or ritualistic behavior. Each of these discoveries adds another layer to the growing evidence that Neanderthals were capable of acts we associate with both the best and worst of humanity. They could nurture the weak and murder their own. They could memorialize the dead and dismember the living. These contrasts are not just historical curiosities. They are reflections of the same behavioral spectrum that continues in humans today. The most disturbing part is not that Neanderthals acted in such ways, but that these impulses are not exclusive to them. They are ancient, buried within our own species, revealing that the capacity for compassion and cruelty may have always walked side by side.